It's 1981, San Antonio, Texas. The pediatric intensive care unit at the San Antonio Charity Hospital is a battlefield for the smallest warriors, fighting for their lives. Tiny bodies tethered to tubes, monitors beeping their relentless tune. But tonight, on the 3 to 11 p.m. shift, there's a traitor in the ranks. The nurses call it the death shift, a name whispered amongst themselves with certainty when she walks in. She is a PICU nurse named Genene Jones.
Try to bring a little sunshine into somebody's life.
Genene cradles a 3-month-old boy.
Hello there, little one.
His breath shallow, his eyes half open. In her hands, a syringe filled with Dilantin and heparin is injected into the Y site of the IV. As the dangerous overdose of medication streams from her hands and into the line, a tender smile of satisfaction appears on her face. She retracts the syringe and lays the baby into the crib and waits. A few minutes later, the boy's chest stills. Alarms scream. Yet another code blue. Of course, Genene, the ever-vigilant hero, is already at the bedside doing her best to revive the boy. The rest of the PICU staff come crashing through the door en masse and take their positions. But this isn't just one bad night. It's months of unexplained deaths. 5 children, ages 3 months to 2 years, suddenly died with seemingly no explanation and often with no warning. Years later, in a prison cell, a cellmate hears her whisper, "I didn't kill those babies. The voices in my head made me do it." But before we unpack that chilling statement, we need to take you back to San Antonio, Texas in 1981 and start from the beginning. Welcome to our very first Halloween special edition. Tonight, we descend into a nightmare of medical history. Although this story is not directly related to EMS, the implications of this terrifying event were so impactful that no healthcare specialty, including EMS, was not directly changed by it forever. In this special 1-hour edition, the story of the angel of death, Genene Jones. The foundations of EMS weren't laid in classrooms or city halls. They were forged on the battlefield, where survival meant moving the wounded fast, improvising care, and learning what worked under fire.
But it didn't stay there. Those lessons bled into the civilian world. Cardiac ambulances rolling through city streets, Freedom House proving what trained paramedics could do, and a white paper that demanded America wake up to its failures.
Piece by piece, the fragments came together. Military medicine, public health, local experiments, each one adding to the system that we know today.
It was messy, uneven, and sometimes overlooked, but out of it came the foundation of modern pre-hospital care.
I'm Evan.
And I'm Sophie.
This is Past Medical History.
The story of EMS. It's summer 1981. The San Antonio Medical Center Hospital's pediatric intensive care unit is a fragile frontier. Hope and despair are often separated by seconds. Tiny patients, some no larger than a loaf of bread, cling to life, lungs wheezing through plastic tubes, hearts painting wickedly jagged rhythms on glowing monitors, nurses and doctors locked in a relentless battle, their hands steady, but their spirits stretched thin. Into this chaotic war zone steps Genene Jones. 31 years old, a nurse whose warmth fills the sterile halls like sunlight through a storm. Barely 5 feet tall, with chestnut hair swept into a neat bun, and a starched white uniform crisp as paper. She carries herself like someone who's been fighting for belonging her whole life. Her badge catches the light with each step, a tiny glint of authority she earned after years of searching for purpose.
Born in 1950 and adopted soon after by a San Antonio nightclub owner and his wife, Genene grew up in a house filled with smoke, laughter, and the relentless noise of people coming and going. Her father, a mostly charming and loving man, built his fortune on the nightlife of post-war Texas. Her mother, glamorous but fragile, was often distant, leaving Genene to invent her own ways to be noticed. A brother she adored died tragically when a pipe bomb that he was building exploded. A boyish experiment gone horribly wrong in their San Antonio garage. Genene was just 16 then, hovering between childhood and the adult world, close enough to hear the blast that ripped the walls apart. They said he'd been tinkering, curious, brilliant even, always trying to make something out of nothing, and just like that, he was gone. The shock left a permanent stillness in her, a silence that even years later seemed to hum just beneath her voice. In the aftermath, the Jones household shifted. Her father withdrew into himself, the laughter that once echoed through the home replaced by the low murmur of grief and guilt. Her mother turned inward too. Fragile, quieter, drowning herself in alcohol to dull the loss. Genene, the youngest in the family, moved through the emptiness like someone trying to keep a delicate candle flame alive in the middle of a hurricane.
Then came the second blow. Her father, once the center of her shrinking universe, was diagnosed with cancer. Before she had time to make sense of it and process what that would mean for her young life, he was gone. The house that was holding on to peace by a fingernail snapped in an instant. The family home fell silent. A silence where every footstep feels too loud. Friends later said this was the turning point for Genene. The girl who once sought attention and affection in small, harmless dramas, a fake cough, a sudden dizzy spell, now carried her pain more quietly. Her need for attention refined into something subtler, deeper. It was though loss had taught her that love only came in crisis, that care and tragedy were forever intertwined. Genene learned that attention could be a kind of love. As a teenager, she faked illnesses for sympathy, lingering in the buzz of concern that gathered around her hospital bed. She drifted for a while in search of herself and her future. First a beauty school graduate, then a young wife at 18, then a divorced mother by 24. Each new role was another mask, another bid to be indispensable. Nursing came next, almost by accident, but she admired the healthcare profession, and it suited her. The white fabric of her uniform, the clean order of it, the way it made people trust her. This was power finally made visible.
Now, in the pediatric ICU, she moves with a quiet grace. Her steps light but purposeful. A clipboard a constant companion at her side. Her voice is soft, honeyed, wrapping around frantic patients like a warm blanket. Her dark eyes sparkle with conviction as she insists on personally handling the sickest cases, the babies teetering on the edge, where even the slightest breath might be a thumb on the scales of life and death. She's the first to leap into action when the alarms scream, lifting the PICU's weight from weary shoulders. To parents, she's a white knight, a savior who fights for their children when all hope seems gone. To her coworkers, she's tireless, staying late, skipping meals, absorbing the chaos with the stamina of someone who needs it. And on the dreaded 3 to 11 shift, her energy seems bottomless. But sometimes that smile lingers just a little too long. Her gaze holds a flicker that doesn't quite match the energy of the moment. There's warmth there, yes, but also something else. A hunger. A need to matter so deeply that it might swallow her whole.
Sometimes all we need is someone to listen. All we need is someone to listen. All we need is someone to listen.
July 1981. A 3-month-old boy codes. The team scrambles. He clings to life, but barely. August 1981. According to the autopsy report, an 11-month-old mysteriously bled out internally. September, October, January 1982. 3 more deaths. A 16-month-old girl seizes and dies. A 10-month-old boy and another toddler. Dead. Each time, Genene's at the bedside shouting for crash carts, her hands pounding tiny chests as monitors wail.
There are whispers in the break room, a chilling undertone to the victories on the floor. They start calling it the death shift. When Genene is on duty, the deaths start piling up. Sure, she's there to intervene at just the right moment, but almost a little too promptly. And in most cases, the child doesn't make it. There are a lot of questions, and of course, the hospital investigates, but quietly. The hospital leaders don't want to invite scandal, or worse, litigation. Ultimately, in 1982, they fired her. Sort of. The hospital announced a staff upgrade. They said it was progress, replacing vocational nurses with registered nurses. A new standard of care, they claimed. But behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. A silent evacuation. A way to remove the problem without admitting there was one. And just like that, Genene, the intrepid hero of the PICU, is searching for another job.
Genene moves to a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, 65 miles from San Antonio. It's supposed to be a new beginning. A quiet town, a quieter clinic. But the quiet won't last. September 1982. 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan toddles into the exam room. Pink bows in her hair, clinging to her mother's leg. It's a routine checkup. Nothing urgent, but Genene Jones leans in.
Hi, Chelsea. She looks a little off today, doesn't she, Mom? Let's run some tests, just to be safe.
Her tone is syrupy, reassuring. Her fingers move with practiced ease, already drawing up a syringe. She explains that it's something calming. Mild. But what slides through that needle is succinylcholine. Chelsea began suffocating slowly. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. Within minutes, her tiny body slumps. Her breathing stops. She dies in her mother's arms. Genene calmly tilts her head, smiling as she delivers her diagnosis.
It must be a seizure. I'm so sorry. These things happen sometimes.
This time, Genene doesn't get to walk away. This time, the monster has a name. Genene Jones. This is one of medical history's darkest stains. A nurse wielding trust as a weapon. In 1981, the idea of a nurse intentionally harming a patient was unthinkable. Hospitals operated on faith and hierarchy. Doctors gave the orders, nurses executed, and no one questioned the sanctity of that trust. Medication rooms were open. Narcotics set in unlocked drawers. Nurses pulled drugs freely, routinely drawing and administering doses without an audit trail. Genene's crimes penned the blood-drenched wake-up call that shook the entire medical industry, not to mention the public. It exposed something buried deep in the heart of medicine, compassion alone cannot protect patients. We want to believe in those who cradle the dying and fight for the living. But trust without verification is not virtue. It's vulnerability. Her case forced a reckoning. Hospitals began implementing double-check systems, secured medication cabinets, and later computerized tracking for every vial and dose. For the first time, patient safety became a discipline of its own. EMS, too, carries the power of life and death in every syringe. The fallout from this landmark case crosses disciplines and decades. One often overlooked but critical aspect of the Genene Jones case was the involvement of EMS providers, particularly in the Kerrville clinic where she worked after leaving the hospital. EMS crews were called to that clinic on multiple occasions, often responding to infants and children in distress. Their reports and documentation would later become vital evidence, helping to piece together the chilling pattern of emergencies that seemed to follow Jones. Paramedics at the time noticed something disturbing. Children who had been healthy during routine visits suddenly crashed without warning. EMS personnel trained to spot patterns in emergencies began to suspect that something wasn't right. Their reports, carefully noting the timeline of each call, the symptoms observed, and the treatments provided, painted a picture that corroborated the suspicions of the parents and the few staff who dared to question Jones. When the case finally made it to court, those EMS-run reports were critical. They detailed how quickly the children deteriorated after leaving Jones's care, and some paramedics testified, recounting their experiences and suspicions. One paramedic described the eerie pattern they observed like this: "We'd get called in for a routine situation like a vaccine, and within minutes, we'd be fighting to save that same child's life." Those testimonies added a layer of real-time urgency, illustrating how Jones's actions didn't just affect the families, but the responders who fought desperately to intervene. The EMS involvement in Genene Jones's case serves as a reminder of how important our documentation and observations can be, not just for immediate care, but for justice. Their vigilance in recording when something wasn't right and their courage to document it became a crucial part of the evidence that finally brought the angel of death to justice. In the 16th century, a Swiss physician and alchemist named, get ready for it, Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, thankfully better known by his self-created nickname, Paracelsus, wrote, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison." The same truth echoes in every medic's jump kit and hospital floor today. A drug is mercy or murder, depending on the hand that holds it. One unchecked syringe, one unwatched moment, and trust collapses. Every safety protocol, every double check, every barcode scan, it all traces back to a single unthinkable question that Genene Jones forced the world to ask. What if the angel at your bedside isn't there to save you? Before we can lock Genene Jones behind bars, we need to take a deep dive into what happened in Kerrville. It's now winter, 1983. The Garden of Memories Cemetery. Under a sliver of moonlight, investigators unearthed a tiny coffin. Inside lie the remains of 14-month-old Chelsea McClellan. She's the little girl who died suddenly in her mother's arms after a routine visit to the local clinic. Her death was officially recorded as unexplained, possibly SIDS, but suspicions had ignited like wildfires. Investigators were now calling it an epidemic, a string of infant arrest and near-fatal collapses with one thing in common: Genene Jones. What investigators had was a series of unfortunate events that seemed to implicate Genene's involvement somehow. But that doesn't prove wrongdoing. What they needed was proof. With autopsy technicians standing by, their breath visible in the cold night air, carefully they collect tissue samples from the tiny body. The usual toxicology tests failed to find anything back in September, but now they know exactly what they're looking for. In a specialized lab half a world away, technicians deploy modern methods to detect nearly invisible poison. Weeks later, the break that investigators were waiting for. A report confirms the presence of succinylcholine in Chelsea's body. Traces of this powerful paralytic agent linger in Chelsea's tissues, highest in her thigh, in the very spot that Genene gave the injection right before she collapsed into her mother's arms. The unthinkable is now undeniable. Chelsea was murdered by an injection that froze her tiny muscles and stole her last breath.
News spreads quickly. Investigators discover that Chelsea's death was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a bizarre outbreak of medical emergencies. In the 31 days leading up to her death, 5 other children who visited Dr. Kathleen Holland's Kerrville clinic mysteriously stopped breathing and nearly died. All were treated and handled by the same nurse, Genene Jones. During an inventory check, a pharmacist discovers a vial of succinylcholine tucked in the back of the clinic refrigerator. Its rubber stopper riddled with punctures. Its contents later discovered to be diluted with saline. Dr. Holland confirms it wasn't one she ordered. She turns in the evidence to authorities. The Texas Rangers are called in, and a criminal investigation begins in Kerrville, leading them down a twisted trail of death all the way back to San Antonio. Investigators discover that while she was working in the PICU in San Antonio, in a span of just 15 months, 42 children died. Not in a war zone, not in the aftermath of some disaster. No, they died in a room filled with fluffy stuffed animals, with cartoon murals peeling off pastel walls. They died in the one place meant to protect them. But even monsters leave fingerprints. "34 of those deaths happened between 3 p.m. and 11 p.m. What the staff behind clenched teeth and side-eyed glances had already been calling the death shift. And 20 of those children, 20 soft-spined, blinking, babbling babies, died while Genene Jones was on duty. Think about it. On Genene's shift, death didn't feel like an accident. It felt scheduled. A child stood a better chance of leaving in a body bag than with their family. And the last thing they saw was Genene Jones, wearing a bedtime story smile, watching, waiting for the light to leave their eyes.
A recently elected district attorney in Bexar County, Sam Millsap, leaks the horrifying story to the press. Texas inquiry on 47 baby deaths screams the front page of the New York Times. Panicked hospital officials scramble to explain themselves. Their long-held silence shatters under public outrage. Each new headline delivers another gut punch to a community already reeling from betrayal. How could this have happened? How could a nurse, someone sworn to protect life, be suspected of murdering the most vulnerable? November 1983. Genene Jones, now 33, is finally arrested and led in handcuffs through a gauntlet of cameras. Genene faces 7 felony indictments, 1 for murder and 6 for nearly killing other children with various medications. In a separate case, she's indicted for gravely injuring a 4-week-old boy, Ronaldo Santos, with a massive dose of heparin. as she is booked, Genene maintains a mask of indignation. To a journalist, she snips,
I'm sick and tired of being crucified alive, of people thinking I'm a baby killer. I haven't killed a damn soul.
Her words echo with anger, but beneath them tremble the ghosts of dozens of dead children, and the evidence is overwhelming. The string of unfortunate events now has teeth, and Genene is about to be torn to shreds by them.
January 1984, Williamson County Courthouse, Georgetown, Texas. Genene Jones goes on trial for the murder of Chelsea McClellan. The venue had to be moved 100 miles away from Kerrville to escape the feverish media coverage. Still, the courtroom is packed. On the front bench sits Petty McClellan, Chelsea's mother. She fixes an unwavering stare on the diminutive woman in the defendant's chair. Genene appears oddly unruffled in court, her chestnut hair neatly restrained, face expressionless. Gone is the overzealous PICU nurse with the endless enthusiasm and quick laughter. In her place sits a stone-faced defendant in pastel dress clothes, taking notes with a steady hand. She pleads not guilty. Throughout the trial, Genene never takes the stand. She lets her defense attorney attempt the impossible, to cast doubt on what happened that September day. The prosecution lays out the story that sounds like a horror film. They argue that Genene Jones intentionally injected children to send them into crisis, just so she could save them. The motive itself makes the jury shift uneasily. It is a madness almost beyond comprehension. One by one, witnesses take the stand. A pediatric doctor recalls the epidemic of respiratory arrest at Dr. Holland's clinic. 6 children crashing without medical explanation in 1 month, always with Jones at their side. A hospital pharmacist details finding the missing vial of succinylcholine, later discovered stashed away with telltale needle holes in the rubber stopper. Dr. Holland herself testifies that Jones had secretly purchased an extra vial of succinylcholine without her knowledge. An emergency room physician who treated Chelsea on that fateful day testifies that the toddler's symptoms did not look like a seizure at all. Instead, what he saw was consistent with a child coming out from under succinylcholine, as if emerging from anesthesia.
The most damning moments come from those who were there. Petty McClellan herself, through tears of rage, recounts how Genene insisted on giving Chelsea 2 routine shots that day. How immediately after the first injection, Chelsea's eyes drifted upward and she couldn't breathe. Genene had cooed that the baby was just upset from the shot, then calmly administered a second injection as her mother protested. Moments later, little Chelsea went limp in her arms. A family friend who had rushed to help testifies that she saw Genene slyly give Chelsea yet another shot just before loading the baby into the ambulance. Genene claimed it was just Valium to calm the child, but an RN on scene had already given Chelsea Valium earlier as ordered. Whatever Jones injected was something else entirely. Within minutes, Chelsea was dead. 2 Kerrville EMTs recall the ambulance ride. They state that Chelsea was stabilized and breathing on her own when they set out for San Antonio. Genene Jones had insisted on riding along. Then halfway to the hospital, Chelsea crashes again. The ambulance had to screech to a halt on a lonely highway so Dr. Holland, who was following in a car, could hop in and frantically attempt resuscitation. But it was too late. The EMTs testify that Chelsea wasn't seizing at all. She was paralyzed. Her tiny heart stilled for the final time.
Remember, a kind word and a smile go a long way in brightening someone's day.
Jurors visibly hold back tears as the story unfolds. Many are parents themselves. The forensic finale comes when a renowned toxicologist steps up to explain the hard science. He describes how months after Chelsea's death, her body was exhumed and samples flown to Sweden for analysis. In deliberate clinical tones, he reports the result: succinylcholine chloride present in multiple tissues, especially the thigh. It's a fingerprint of murder. The very drug that caused Chelsea's muscles to stop working was found where Genene injected her. The courtroom sits in stunned silence. There it is, scientific proof of an angel of death at work.
Genene's defense attorneys fight back as best they can. They argue the evidence is circumstantial, that no one actually saw what was in Genene's syringes. They suggest perhaps Chelsea truly had an unexplained seizure disorder or an allergic reaction. The defense hammers at the Sweden test results. Such a novel technique, unorthodox, not yet broadly accepted. Perhaps, they imply, the fancy machinery found something that wasn't really there. But those arguments ring hollow. The pattern of 6 near-fatal seizures in 1 month under Genene's care is too peculiar to be a coincidence. The punctured succinylcholine vial, the eyewitnesses to the extra injection, the lab results, each piece alone is suspicious. But together they form a damning mosaic of guilt.
After weeks of testimony, the case goes to the jury. They deliberate in tense silence. By now, the name Genene Jones stands for everything parents fear. It's Valentine's Day, 1984, when the verdict is delivered. Genene Jones is found guilty of murder in the first degree. As the verdict is read aloud, a wail of relief and grief rises from the spectator benches. Hetty McClellan clutches her husband's arm. As if, at long last, Chelsea's voice has been heard. Genene Jones, once a guardian in white, now stands officially unmasked as a murderer.
May 1984. The judge sentences Genene to 99 years in prison for the murder of Chelsea Ann McClellan, the maximum. Genene, now 34 years old, absorbs the number with eyes cast downward. In October, she's hauled back into court for the Bexar County case, this time facing the charge of poisoning baby Ronaldo Santos with heparin. Again, the evidence is meticulous. Hospital records of unexplained bleeding, emergency doses of antidote saving the infant's life in the nick of time. She's convicted of injury to a child and given 60 years to run concurrently with her 99-year term. Genene Jones will be behind bars until she's an elderly woman, in theory, for the rest of her life. In the wake of verdicts, outrage still simmers. It wasn't just Genene who failed these children. It was the whole system. Evidence at trial revealed that hospital administrators had known something was terribly wrong, more afraid of lawsuits and bad press than a murderer in their midst. In fact, after Genene's conviction, it emerged that the hospital had misplaced or destroyed many records of her time there. A cynical attempt to erase liability. To the public, this was an unforgivable sin of silence. If someone had spoken up sooner, if action had been taken in 1981, so many of these babies might have lived. The trial not only shone a light on a killer nurse, but on a colossal betrayal by those who chose not to stop her. As Genene Jones is escorted out in handcuffs, the families of her victims watch with hollow satisfaction. Genene's true victim count remains a mystery. Some say she killed up to 60 infants and children, but we may never know. The angel of death has fallen, condemned to a hell of her own creation. But as the prison doors lock tight, somewhere deep inside, Genene Jones sits in silence. And the echoes of tiny heartbeats she silenced continue to cry out for truth. Their voices will not be forgotten. The final chapter is yet to be written.
Genene Jones begins her sentence in a Texas penitentiary. Inmate number 00380650. She occasionally let slip chilling confessions that would only surface years later. In a 1998 parole interview, the former nurse broke into tears and blurted out, "I really did kill those babies." Another time, an inmate reported Jones muttering, "I didn't kill those babies, the voices in my head did." A cryptic hint at the disturbed psyche. These whispers, buried in parole files, painted an even darker portrait of Genene's mindset. In a 2011 letter from prison, Jones spoke of the damage I did all because of my crime, admitting it was heinous that I was heinous. Each statement was a small, belated crack in the facade of denial she'd maintained for years. Inside her cell, Jones led a relatively quiet existence, but traces of her unnerving legacy were literally written into her belongings. Investigators who searched her prison cell discovered Jones's Bible, scrawled with her handwriting, references to children and to sin woven into the margins. For a woman dubbed the Angel of Death, even acts of piety took on a dark aura. Guards noted that Jones fiercely clung to that Bible. She even petitioned a court to have it returned when it was seized as evidence in her new murder indictments.
As the years passed, an unspeakable prospect grew near. Genene Jones, convicted baby killer and suspected of murdering dozens more infants, might walk free. By the mid-2010s, Jones had served about 30 years of her 99-year sentence. A quirk of Texas law meant the unthinkable might be looming. A short-lived Texas mandatory release law, enacted to ease prison overcrowding back in the 1970s, guaranteed that inmates who kept their disciplinary record clean would be released after serving a third of their sentence. For Genene, that date was set for early 2018. She would be only 67 years old. The public and legal reaction to this news was swift and visceral. Just the idea of a serial killer walking free in the United States of America is the craziest thing I have ever heard of, said Patty McClellan, mother of baby Chelsea McClellan, whom Jones murdered in 1982. As 2018 grew closer, a sense of alarm spread through Texas. Was the Angel of Death really about to slip out of prison due to a loophole? Behind the scenes, victims' families and prosecutors mobilized to slam the door shut. Patty McClellan, by then in her 60s, became the catalyst for a campaign to keep Jones imprisoned. Teaming up with Houston victims advocate Andy Cahan, she pressed officials to find any legal means to stop Jones's release. Their strategy borrows from another notorious case, that of serial killer Coral Watts, where a new murder charge had been used to derail a scheduled release. In the light of these new developments, the Bexar County District Attorney's Office took up the case with fervor.
Nico LaHood, the DA, vowed to make sure Jones will take her last breath behind bars. Starting in mid-2017, a grand jury handed down 5 new murder indictments against Jones, each tied to an infant's suspicious death in the early 1980s. It was an extraordinary legal maneuver. Functionally, this was retrying 35-year-old killing spree, something that normally could not be done, but it worked. She came within months of release, but the law had finally caught up with her. Why on earth would she be allowed to walk among us? Prosecutor Kathleen Babbitt remarked, reflecting the public outcry. Had these indictments not been filed, Genene Jones would have strolled out of prison in February of 2018, a free woman. Instead, the prison gates stayed closed. In court hearings that followed, more unsettling revelations poured out as prosecutors raced to solidify their case. Jason Gose, the assistant DA leading the charge, combed through 65,000 pages of records from Genene's original incarceration. That's when he unearthed those weird, hidden confessions. The memo about her sobbing, "I did inject that little girl," to a parole commissioner in 2011. And the parole interview in 1998 where she admitted killing babies. These smoking gun statements, buried in the bureaucracy for years, gave prosecutors new ammunition. In an April 2018 hearing, Gose testified in detail about Genene's own incriminating words. The judge denied a desperate motion to dismiss the charges on technical grounds from her legal defense team. The path was clear to finally hold her accountable for more of her crimes, and more importantly, to ensure she would never leave prison alive. As one official put it bluntly, the odds are that she will take her last breath in prison.
When Genene Jones finally stood in a San Antonio courtroom in January 2020 to be sentenced for one of the newly charged murders, a sea of victims' families faced her down. Connie Weeks, mother of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer, the victim in the case Jones pled guilty to, stood just a few feet from Jones and spoke through tears. "I'm glad that you will never see daylight," she said to the gray-haired woman in shackles. "I hope you live a long and miserable life behind bars." Nearby, Rosemary Vega Cantu clutches a photograph of her 2-year-old daughter, another alleged victim, and sobbed as she addressed the nurse. "I trusted you with my daughter," Cantu cried. "You would tell me, 'It's going to be okay, Rosemary.' My baby girl never had a chance to go to school, to get married, to have grandbabies." In the court gallery, veteran detectives and seasoned court officials wiped their eyes as Cantu exposed her shattered heart. And what was Genene doing? She was staring straight ahead with no visible reaction at all.
One by one, the relatives of other slain infants stood up to confront the killer. Melissa Luna, whose brother, Paul Villarreal, died at 3 months old of an inexplicable heparin overdose, spoke not only for herself, but for her late mother and for other victims' families who couldn't be in court that day. Luna called Genene a cold-hearted monster and said neither of them made it to their first birthday because you decided to take their lives. Genene's affect remained cold and flat as Luna went on. "You wanted to see how many times you could bring them back, as if you thought you were God himself." That reference struck at the dark heart of Jones' motive, the so-called hero nurse syndrome, where a nurse causes crisis just to revive patients and earn praise. In Genene's case, the price of her heroic fantasy was paid in the lives of infants. Luna ended her diatribe by declaring that she felt vindicated because, quote, "I can leave here today with a smile on my face because although my brother is in a box, I know that you'll take your last pathetic breath in one too."
Remember, try to bring a little sunshine into somebody's life.
Perhaps the most haunting presence in court was Kylie McClellan, the surviving daughter of Petty McClellan. Kylie never met her older sister Chelsea, the 15-month-old girl Genene murdered in 1982, but she grew up under the long shadow of that tragedy. After Petty died in 2019, Kylie had promised to carry on her mother's fight. She stood before Genene and introduced herself pointedly. "My mother was Petty McClellan Weiss. My sister was Chelsea McClellan." Those names in that courtroom had a gravitas that silenced everyone. It reminded everyone of the 40-year crusade Petty had waged to hold Genene accountable for her heinous savagery. Reading a statement on behalf of her mother, Kylie's voice trembled. 40 years have gone by since you took my baby's life. You must have a very large black heart. Even without Petty actually in the room, her words, delivered through her daughter, pierced the silence. Judge Frank Castro then addressed the court, echoing the family's anguish in solemn tones. Looking down at Genene, the judge acknowledged her plea deal, but stated, "It doesn't come close to what you did to these families, the tragedies that you caused. You took one of God's most precious gifts, defenseless, innocent. I truly believe your ultimate judgment is in the next life." Genene Jones, the woman they call the Angel of Death, was helped to her feet as Judge Castro pronounced the life sentence. Some families clutched each other in relief. Others quietly wept. Then Genene was led away to spend the rest of her days in prison, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts and hard-fought justice.
Genene Jones' dark saga has left scars not just on families, but on the entire medical community. The haunting question raised by her crimes: how could this happen? Why did no one stop her sooner? Forced hospitals and regulators to take a hard look at patient safety practices. In the 1980s, Genene exploited gaps in oversight that seem unthinkable now. For instance, at San Antonio's Charity Hospital, home of the infamous death shift, there had been 34 unexplained deaths in 15 months. That's a 178% spike in mortality. Despite that glaringly obvious data, administrators failed to sound the alarm. In 1985, New England Journal of Medicine study later concluded that the pattern might have been detected if hospital officials had kept closer track of the circumstances of the deaths. Instead, the hospital quietly asked Jones and another rotational nurse to resign, and even gave her a good recommendation, sweeping the situation under the rug. That disastrous decision enabled Jones to take a job at that rural clinic where she killed again. Today, a cover-up like that would be virtually impossible. Genene's case became a rallying cry for transparency and accountability in healthcare. Hospitals are now acutely aware that silence is not an option. Unusual clusters of patient deaths must be investigated and reported, not hidden to protect liability. In Texas, officials vowed never to let another angel of death slip through the cracks. Laws and hospital policies were re-examined to ensure that suspected abuse by medical staff is swiftly reported to law enforcement and licensing boards. It's a hard lesson written in innocent blood.
Modern safety patient protocols across the country bear the imprint of this case. Some of the lasting changes include drug tracking and control, Genene's favorite weapons. Drugs like succinylcholine and scheduled medications are now tightly controlled substances in hospitals. Pharmacy systems track every dose. Automated dispensing cabinets require secure logins and witness countersigns for high-risk medications. Hospitals and emergency medical services today conduct formal sentinel event reviews whenever a patient's collapse or death is unexplained. If a single provider is associated with multiple emergencies or codes, a multidisciplinary team investigates the pattern. Genene Jones's death shift is often cited in medical literature as a case study in the importance of recognizing statistical anomalies. Pediatric ICUs, in particular, now track code rates and outcomes by shift, generating reports that would quickly expose an aberration like 34 deaths on one nurse's watch. Perhaps the most important change is cultural. The era of quietly dismissing a problematic caregiver to avoid scandal has given way to a mandate of reporting and zero tolerance. Providers are now encouraged, even legally required in some states, to report colleagues who exhibit dangerous behavior. Whistleblower protections have been strengthened so that those who speak up won't be silenced or punished.
Genene Jones will spend the rest of her life in a Texas prison, but the lessons of her case live on. In an industry built on trust and care, she exposed how one person's corruption and a system's failures could intersect to create unspeakable tragedy. And worse, she nearly got away with it. Then a justice system that almost failed was bent at the last hour to prevent a monstrous injustice. But the emotional and psychological impact of her crimes remains searingly alive. Genene Jones is one of the most notorious medical serial killers on record. Stephen King reportedly drew inspiration from Genene Jones when crafting the fictional nurse in his book titled Misery.
Sometimes I get so worked up. Can you ever forgive me?
In South Texas, the mere mention of her name can send a shudder through those who remember the death shift. Parents hug their children a little tighter. Patient care providers double-check dosage logs, and hospital administrators think of her whenever they implement new safety policy. As our podcast, sinister yet true story comes to a close, picture Genene Jones sitting in her cell in the dim light of evening. On the wall hangs a calendar that will never have a date marked release. In her hands, perhaps, that tattered Bible, pages marked with the cryptic confession of a soul in turmoil. For the families, there is some comfort in knowing that nightfall finds Genene Jones behind bars and not roaming free. I hope you live a long and miserable life behind bars, one mother had told her, a curse born from unbearable loss. That wish has been granted. Jones will remain in a concrete hell of her own creation, left to reckon with the lives she stole. And for every day she remains locked up is, for the survivors, a small triumph of justice over evil.
Genene Jones's story will be retold for generations. A chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a gentle smile, and the light that determined families and honest professionals can shine to expose it. Locked in her cell, the angel of death rots in the stench of her sick, twisted crimes, with no escape from the kids she butchered. Welcome to hell, Mrs. Jones.
Just think about you hanging in there. Well, just know we're all here together. We're all here together. Just know.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Past Medical History, the Story of EMS. If you did, it would mean the world to us if you took a moment to rate and review the show wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps others discover these stories and keeps us inspired to share more. Know someone who loved this episode? Send it their way and help us grow the conversation. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at PMHX Podcast for behind-the-scenes updates and announcements about our first season. Stay tuned for release dates and more exclusive content. Past Medical History, the Story of EMS is a Nova Sequence Studios production in association with Long Pause Media, a division of Flightbridge Ed. Music by Wicked Cinema.